Let's take a deeper dive into the principle of autonomy. Any notion of moral decision-making assumes that the rational agents are involved in making informed and voluntary decisions. In healthcare decisions, our respect for the autonomy of the patient would, in common parlance, imply that the patient has the capacity to act intentionally, with understanding, and without controlling influences that would mitigate against a free and voluntary act. The principle is the basis for the practice of informed consent in the physician-patient relationship. In a prima facie sense, we ought to always respect the autonomy of the patient. Such respect is not simply a matter of attitude, it's not simply being nice, but it's a way of acting as to recognize and even promote the autonomous actions of the patient. The autonomous person may freely choose values, loyalties, or systems of religious belief that limit other freedoms of that person. Let's look at an example. Jehovah's Witnesses have a belief that it is wrong to accept blood transfusion. Therefore, in a life-threatening situation where a blood transfusion is required to save the life of that patient, the patient must be so informed. The consequences of refusing a blood transfusion must be made clear to the patient at risk of dying from blood loss. Desiring to benefit the patient, the physician may strongly want to provide a blood transfusion, believing that it's a clear medical benefit. It is. When properly and compassionately informed, the particular patient is then free to choose whether they accept the blood transfusion, keeping with a strong desire to live, or whether they wish to refuse the blood transfusion, in giving a greater priority to his or her religious convictions about the wrongness of blood transfusions, even to the point of accepting death as a predictable outcome. This communication process must be compassionate and respectful of the patient's unique values, even if they differ from the standard goals of medicine. Let's do a deeper analysis here. In analyzing the case of the Jehovah's Witness, the physician had a prima facie duty to respect the autonomous choice of the patient, applying the principle of autonomy, as well as a prima facie duty to avoid harm and to provide a medical benefit, applying the principle of non-maleficence. In this case, informed by community practice and the provisions of the law for the free exercise of one's religion, the physician gave greater priority to the respect for the patient's autonomy than to other duties. However, some ethicists claim that in respecting the patient's choice not to receive blood, the principle of non-maleficence also applies and must be interpreted in light of the patient's belief system about the nature of harms, in this case, spiritual harm. By contrast, in an emergency, if the patient in question happens to be, say, a 10-year-old child, and the parents refuse permission for a life-saving blood transfusion, in some states, there is legal precedence for overriding the parents' wishes by appealing to the juvenile court judge, who is authorized by the state to protect the lives of its citizens, particularly minors, until they reach the age of maturity, typically 18, and can make such choices independently. Thus, in the case of the vulnerable minor child, the principle of avoiding the harm of death and the principle of providing medical benefit that can restore the child to health and life would be given precedence over the autonomy of the child's parents as surrogate decision makers. A lot to consider there.